Just for texture, you can add the 6, the card.
Sexy number 6.
Yeah, this is a sexy prop that means that there's a sandwich coming. I've been doing a thing in my older age of trying to figure out what kind of foods, just sort of how my body reacts to certain foods and what I should be eating. And I was the most stressful day here. Speaking of,
yeah, on cue.
Yeah, no, you go ahead. Come on.
By all means.
But yeah, the most stressful day was when I tested pork. Because I was like, what kind of Cuban will I be if it turns out like I'm not supposed to have, if I have a physical aversion to pork. But I'm proud to announce that I did pass the test, the pork test.
So being from New York, though, that is like being from, essentially like being from Europe. It's as close to as being from Europe as it gets in the United States, probably.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me it was more South American, and it was like my childhood is a mix of weird experiences, New York, New Jersey, and like very heavily Latin American oriented, and then in addition to that, just like any human's life in the United States, also just layered. The bread outside of every experience is white people. So
that is pretty funny.
Those experiences.
The outside of the sandwich.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Those experiences are there no matter what. But it was a weirder. I mean, it's not something you know is weird until you come out of it and then realize that like that's not what other people are experiencing. But for me, it was definitely it was interesting because it was a lot of.
You mean being from New York was it was eye-opening to realize that other people are not having that experience?
Yeah, once I like my perspective, I had the balance of like my day-to-day as a kid, which was one thing, and it was very like working class, Spanish speaking, actually not super arts driven, except my mother was very, very nerdy, but my stepfather I grew up with was like, didn't really read books or listen to music or anything. And then being obsessed myself with like film specifically, and realizing that those experiences, what were being presented, were very, very different from my life. And that actually weirdly creating almost a kind of shame in my experience, like, as if I was doing it wrong, or as if
Well, you're from one of the two major American examples of, everything's filmed in New York or Los Angeles.
Yeah, but they're not filmed from the perspective of what I was growing up in.
Right.
And so I think those things, it became difficult for me to process, like when I saw what the actual fairy tale was supposed to be, to process what my connection was to it. I think it's different from a general consensus version, but I think it was also even more different from my personal version of things. And I found that it was a weird thing for me to see, like, regardless, even in New York, everything was still largely about, Jack Blacker or whatever. I don't know. That was my worst attempt at an 80s super, action hero name. But like just a dude, like just some dude with his hair parted on the side and, and mirrored sunglasses. And that wasn't at all, not that anyone is growing up that way, but from my perspective, I was so far outside of that. I think a lot of people, your first connection to fiction or movies or whatever is you envision yourself as the hero of it, right?
Yeah.
My life was so drastically different from all of those movies that I early on found myself at odds a little bit with sort of my own identity and trying to figure out like how could I whittle away the parts of it that didn't fit with the movie. Does that make any sense? Yeah. So weirdly enough, I guess ultimately going back to what you were saying in terms of your own upbringing, I think growing up in this country and a different upbringing possibly to some degree makes you long for something similar to what you were experiencing.
Yeah. When I lived here, one of the things that was, I was so fucking broke at the time.
Yeah.
But one of the things that kept me sort of positive was I kept thinking, I've never been in a place with more like opportunity.
Yes. Or more stimulus.
Yes, as hard as it is, like I'm learning something new every day, and everything that used to feel a million miles away is now within my reach.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't mean that the
Doesn't
doors
mean
are
you can
open.
get it. No, but there's
you
like
can
a
see
weird
the doors. You know,
that can either be like an incredibly optimistic feeling or like an incredibly crushing feeling. It's a hard place, but you can. I mean, that's the cliche of you can make it here, you can make it anywhere, and I think that that's definitely true. I think that this is the hardest setting, and if you can survive it, and that's not saying that. I realize that may sound like bragging, and I don't think that there's a special skill to it. I just think it's very difficult to do, and when you figure out how to do it, that it does hopefully give you. It's like a muscle that you have now, and it doesn't. That muscle luckily doesn't go away. That's all. John Mueller, he's the best. He's great at being a reporter because he's from New York. John Mueller, he's from New York. He's good at the news because of where he's from.
all right, you want to try and recreate what we were talking about on the train?
Yeah, but I don't know what it was. Start cameras and shit.
Yeah, well, it's interesting to me that you're trying to learn how to do this because it's funny how whenever somebody tries to do something that they're not typically known for, that other people sort of give them shit.
Yeah. I don't know. It is funny though that the more I sort of play around with it, the more I see sort of symbiosis between the two, and certainly between the drawing end and the camera, and realizing that like I started out and with cameras, and it was all about just sort of the megapixels and like look how crystal clear that image is, and look at the amount of detail, and then realizing that like at least for my taste, the detail isn't necessarily the thing you're trying to get across, and how much you might deal with the way an artist would, just how much is about removing detail, if anything, and about focusing your eye towards a point, a story point.
Filtering it through your own point of view.
Yeah, how much like, especially when I'm dealing with like dark photos, just how much of that is about like, oh, if I add darkness, if I emphasize the darkness, it's going to point the mood and the eye and whatever towards this tunnel or towards this pocket of dark that is the point of this picture.
Pocket of dark.
Yeah,
IVÁN Brandon.
right. But it's funny that like a lot of that, it comes down to like, I think when you're younger, and I remember when I was drawing, and I'm sure it's the same for you, the idea of like how, drawing something that looks just like a photo seems like it's the right move at first, and then you realize that it's not. It's maybe not even the best way to get across that thing. Like it's not even, like even realism isn't necessarily best expressed by realism,
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I mean, the easiest way to visualize that is you shoot a sunrise, and you have one of those beautiful pinks or oranges or whatever else, and you're like, you look at it, and there's nothing you're ever going to be able to do that's going to capture that. Like there's zero chance that whatever you show, if you show that to someone, there's zero chance that that pink or that whatever purple, whatever it is going to be the right pink or purple. And so ultimately, you have to choose what's the expression of that thing, and like what's the story of that thing, and how you're going to express that. And I think that's
mood and memory
right.
and tone.
Yeah, and it's a very flawed like telephone version of showing someone a sunrise, but it's fun to have that kind of control. And I think once you give in a little bit to that and realize that it's not about accuracy, it's about the accuracy of the feeling.
Yeah.
That gives you a lot of freedom, I think, to really screw around with things and to make some. I guess it just your hands can be very, very tied up by the idea of realism and what that means, and finding a way to just represent something in a way that feels accurate can give you, I think, some freedom to to more comfortably play with things and just like, well, if this particular color wasn't essential to this story, then what things are essential? Because I mean, sometimes, I mean, that's what I deal with a lot, like dealing with translation, for example, is how do you, when you deal with a translation, different languages don't always function the same way.
Yeah.
And their purposes can be different, and just trying to figure out like what the mood of what I wrote the first time is not best represented sometimes by the exact words that you would sort of Google translate. And I might have to actually even change like a noun to get that mood across, you know, and like change what theoretically would have been the root of the sentence in English is not anymore because it just doesn't capture the mood. And I think that that's really interesting how.
That's such a interesting way to be able to view the world. Man, when my dad was sick, the cancer doctor was Pakistani. And there was a point where he was translating this really sort of cutting edge medical jargon to my parents, who were from, you know, North Carolina, have accents like mine.
Right.
And he's thinking in both, not just scientific medical terms, but stuff that's like way ahead of the
Right, I think parsing like 11 different languages
yeah,
at the same
exactly.
time.
And I was just like, there was a point where I was like, this motherfucker's a genius. It's like this motherfucker's like Data from Star Trek or something, you know?
I feel like that, but I do feel that's interesting because I do think I think that's a great example of that, because I do think like people who deal with expressing themselves either through science, through math, or whatever the hell, they really are speaking a different language, and I think that also alters their perceptions on just regular day-to-day language.
Right.
You know?
Well, these days, the only color Kanye West sees in his head is a red MAGA hat.
That's it.
But when he talks about seeing colors in his head,
Yeah.
people act like he's crazy. He says he can see sounds as colors.
Well, it's weird. It's like you have different. I was watching a thing the other day, and it was a really interesting thing, and I had never really thought about it. I just sort of instantly gravitate towards like realizing that the languages aren't interchangeable. But you realize like there's certain things like between English and Spanish, for example, where you have like, if I knocked your camera over, I'd be like, oh shit, I broke your camera. In Spanish, that doesn't really. You'd say se rompió, which it means it broke. Right? Like you wouldn't claim ownership for that.
Right, yeah. As if it shows to
Right.
the universe broke it.
But it's hilarious because that really does inform the way that you think of everything and the way that you think of action and agency and all that stuff. It's funny because I was thinking about this the other day, and maybe this is just my perspective on it, but
What was that?
I don't know. I think it's just we're being attacked by a dragon. It's right. But it occurred to me that like just shifts in languages, even in my lifetime, have gotten to the point where our language is so hyperbolic that like if you want someone to say I'm sorry, for example, if I want to tell you I'm sorry, I'd say I'm really sorry. I'm sincerely sorry. You have to add qualifiers because the language just becomes so hyperbolic that no one takes anything as literal anymore. I say that as the phrase no one takes anything as literal is obviously also itself hyperbolic. Well, it also makes you, theoretically would make, I mean, this is sort of why I've been telling you and I'm telling a lot of people that I've been pushing away from text communication and more, which is ironic for someone who makes his living by text communication, but just
Much to the fucking rejoicing of all social media.
But it's just the idea that like being so precious and pedantic with the idea of words when you realize that like different people, different cultures, different whatever, all mean different things when they say the exact same thing. I think comics, to whatever degree, there's a lot of different things you can attribute anyone's love of comics to, and I've got a thing that I've always been talking about. If there's like there's a lot of abusive behaviors built into comics, self-abusive and otherwise, and I think that it basically starts at, there's an inherent, and maybe it's not 100% of people, but I think it's a very large percentage of people, an inherent loneliness that people are trying to get past, and that expression in art and writing and whatever it is some tiny attempt to exceed that grasp and to bridge the gap into like the pit of darkness that's inside me and give you some tiny little piece and us share back. Yeah, that sucks together. And I think that's what's that's what's amazing about trying to have these conversations, because I think they come from the same root of like just trying to find some tiny little connection.
The best part, other than that guy walking the frame, was that, as you were saying something really eloquent and profound, one of those pigeons almost like went kamikaze into the camera.
Nice.
As if it was trying to purposely
That would have been
stop you
perfect.
from talking.
That would have been amazing. Oh, I'm sorry I missed that.